They say the land never forgets. Every drop of sweat, every ounce of blood, every lie-buried deep pit all sinks into the soil and waits to rise again. In Texas, that soil is soaked with oil, and men are willing to tear the earth apart to claim it. But in the chase for black gold, it isn't just the ground that cracks its families. Its promises, its lives. The story begins with dust rolling across a wide-open plain. For generations, this land had been cattle country, nothing but dirt, wind, and stubborn men who thought themselves kings of their own little empires. But when oil was found, everything changed. What was once quiet turned into chaos. Steel rigs clawed at the horizon, and the earth bled black into the hands of those bold enough to take it. Among these men stood one family, holding a piece of land that others would kill for. The father, a man who had worked the soil his whole life, wanted nothing to do with the machines or the contracts. He believed land was sacred, not something to be carved up for profit. But his son, the heir, the restless one, saw the world differently. He was tired of dust, tired of cattle, tired of watching others strike deals that turned their dirt into dynasties. He wanted in, and he was willing to sacrifice anything to get there. The son wasn't alone. He found himself drawn into the orbit of the landmen, the slick-talking dealmakers who prowled the oil fields with papers in one hand and promises in the other. They weren't roughnecks, not drillers or ranchers. They didn't break their backs in the sun. They made fortunes with ink and lies, convincing families to sign away legacies for a check that barely lasted a season. The son watched them work, and he understood. Power didn't live in the dirt anymore. It lived in the contracts, but power, once tasted, comes with hunger, and hunger is never satisfied. The son began pulling himself deeper into the game, chasing every lead, every rumor of a new strike. He learned quickly that in the oil fields loyalty was a myth. Men shook hands while plotting betrayals. Friends sold each other out for a bigger cut. Families split down the middle, brothers against brothers, fathers against sons. The son's choices lit a fire inside his home, one that spread faster than oil on open water. The father begged him to walk away, to remember that land was more than profit. But the son couldn't. Each deal he struck gave him more money, more respect, more whispers that his name might carry weight someday. Yet with every deal, the distance between him and his father grew. Love was being traded for power, and the son didn't even see it slipping through his fingers, and beyond the family, larger players circled. Corporations with endless resources, politicians who bent laws like twigs, and rivals who would rather see a man buried than beaten in negotiation. The son thought he was climbing, thought he was winning, but in truth he was stepping into a war where there were no victors, only survivors. The land watched, silent but heavy, as men bled over it. Deals written in offices far away decided the fate of those who had lived here for generations. The son's story was only the beginning, one thread in a web of greed, ambition, and betrayal. In Texas, oil wasn't just business, it was war. And in war, everyone is expendable. The first crack in the son's plan did not come from a rival. It came from water. A creek that had run clear since his grandfather's time turned the color of weak tea after a test well went live up the road. Cows would not drink from it. The father stood at the bank with a bucket and stared at the slow brown swirl. He did not shout, he did not curse. He only said that a man can live without oil, but he cannot live without water. The son told him it was only silt from fresh work. He said the filters would fix it. Yet that night the kitchen smelled like iron, and the father set a glass down without taking a sip. The son kept moving, because motion is a kind of courage when you have doubts. He met a new landman at a diner that served coffee so strong it could peel paint. She wore a simple jacket and no rings. Her pitch was different from the others. No big talk, no shiny words. She spoke of maps and rights that crossed below the ground like old cattle trails. She said the trick was not to fight the river. The trick was to guide it. The son watched her draw a box around his family's acres and then draw a line right through the box, a pipeline route. Efficient, inevitable, profitable. He signed a letter of intent before the pie reached the table. News traveled. Neighbors who still ran cattle, came by the fence with hard eyes. They said the pipeline would cut through their pasture and spook the herd. They said their grandmothers were buried under the mesquite and the survey flag stood too close to the stones. The son listened, said the survey could bend, said there was room for all, said they would be paid fair. But the word fair tastes different in different mouths. Someone cut down a line of flags in the night and left them coiled like dead snakes. At his gate, the father went to a county meeting in a shirt that had been pressed only once, the day his wife was buried. He spoke slow into a squealing microphone about soil and graves and faith. People clapped, then argued in the parking lot until a deputy turned on his lights. The son did not go. He was on a call with the woman from the diner and 2 men from a high floor in Houston who said that time kills value. He put the phone on mute and heard coyotes singing beyond the porch, then unmuted and said he understood. A small thing turned large. The father's oldest friend, a quiet man with a bad knee, kept a well behind his barn. One morning the pump coughed up mud in a sheen that caught the sun. He brought a jar to the son and set it on the hood of his truck. He said he did not come for a fight, he came for help. The son promised tests and a fix. He meant it. But by the end of the week, the jar had become a photo on a screen in town, and the photo became a story, and the story grew legs. Strangers he had never met spoke his name like it was a brand burned into the hide of everything that had gone wrong. The woman from the diner warned him that noise attracts wolves. She said a rival firm had started knocking doors on the north side, offering quick cash and a faster drill. They did not care about permits. They did not care about fences. They only cared about being first. She told the son to lock down the route, all of it today. He drove for hours, ranch to ranch, paper in his glove box, pen in his pocket. He shook hands, told stories, made promises he prayed he could keep. At one place, a boy of 6 opened the door with dirt on his face and a toy truck in his hand. The boy's mother came after him with a tired smile. The son saw the kitchen behind her, clean but thin, and added a clause to the agreement without being asked. The father watched from the porch as the son came home well past dark. He asked nothing at first. They sat in the half-light with crickets, loud enough to feel like rain. Then the father said that once you cut the first straight line through a pasture, you spend the rest of your days drawing straight lines through everything else. The son said straight lines build roads, and roads bring things the land has never had: doctors, schools, a future. The father nodded and said futures have bills due later. Storms rolled in early that year. Wind tore at tin roofs, and the rigs leaned like tall men bracing a punch. A transformer blew, and the valley went dark. In the black, a flare lit the sky to the south, and for a moment the world looked like a photograph burned at the edges. The son woke to an alert on his phone. A worker injured at a site tied to one of his contracts. Not on their land, but close enough that the name would stick. He drove out there in boots he had not worn since branding season and walked the mud as dawn turned the clouds to ash. He felt it then, the weight of signatures, the math of lives. By noon, the rival firm had a camera crew on another road, telling their own clean story. They spoke of safety and jobs and vision. They did not mention the jar or the creek or the man with the bad knee. The son realized something that smart people learn too late. Truth moves slow, and rumor owns a car. He needed a counter. He needed a win that could not be spun. The woman from the diner called with a map that showed a pocket under the ridge. Small but sweet, the kind of pocket that could turn opinion for a season. They could lease it fast, drill careful, send checks. Before Christmas, the son stared at the ridge through the windshield. He remembered the first time his father let him ride there alone. He remembered the feeling of small wind on a big sky. He said yes when he brought the lease to the father. The old man did not read it. He only asked where the well would sit. The son pointed at the ridge on the map. The father closed his eyes, like he had been struck. He said some places are more than dirt. Some places hold the sound of people you cannot hear anymore. The son folded the map, and the paper made a sound like dry grass. He said the ridge could save them. The father said not every kind of saving is worth the cost. Night fell again. Coyotes sang again. Far off, a generator coughed itself to silence. The son lay awake and counted deals like sheep, but they did not let him sleep. He thought of the boy with the toy truck. He thought of the jar on the truck hood. He thought of the ridge and the pipeline line cutting neat across its face. He told himself that pain is often the price of growth, that someone must carry the burden so others can eat. Through the window he could see the shadow of the pump jack nodding and nodding as if it agreed. At dawn he signed the ridge. He did it in simple ink with a name that had once meant only cattle and rain. He felt no triumph. He felt a door close somewhere in the house he could not find. Then his phone lit again. A message from the woman. The rival firm was filing an injunction, claiming the route crossed a heritage right-of-way they had quietly bought at auction. The son stared at the screen while the sun lifted over the mesquite. He understood the new shape of the war. It was not steel versus soil. It was paper versus memory, and the paper had lawyers. He went to wake the father to tell him before the town did. He stopped in the hall. The old man was up, sitting at the kitchen table with the untouched glass of water from days ago. Between them on the table lay the original deed to the land, creased and soft from 100 readings. The father tapped it once and said that the land remembers, but so do people. Then he slid the deed toward his son and asked a simple, final question. When we are gone, who will speak for this ground? Asterisk. The injunction spread like wildfire through town. Courthouse steps filled with reporters who had never set foot in cattle country, their shoes sinking in the dust as they shoved microphones toward anyone with a story. The son's name was on their lips, tangled with words like fraud, greed, betrayal. Yet in the city, men in suits spoke of him with admiration. They called him bold, they called him fearless. They said he was the kind of man who could bend a county to his will. The son heard both sides and realized that reputation is a coin, with two faces and both spend the same, but at home, the cost was heavier. The father no longer argued. Silence took the place of fury, and silence is harder to bear. He sat on the porch with his hat pulled low, watching dust devils twist across the pasture as though waiting for the land itself to decide the fight. The son wanted to bridge the distance, but each word he tried died before it left his throat. Oil had taken their language, replacing it with numbers, leases, clauses that meant nothing to the rhythm of rain or the weight of a calf in spring. The woman from the diner pressed him harder. She said the rival firm was not just another competitor. They were backed by a chain of investors who never showed their faces but sent lawyers like arrows in the dark. She warned that once they sank their claws into the county, they would strip it bare and move on, leaving nothing but rust. If you want to keep even a piece of this land, she told him, you can't just play the game. You have to own the board. So he played. Meetings stretched past midnight. Deals were struck in motels, on tailgates, in bars that smelled of beer and old wood. He promised jobs, promised security, promised futures that sounded golden under the neon lights. Paper slid across sticky tables, pens scraped, signatures flowed. He told himself it was survival, that the ends would justify the means. But survival, he discovered, breeds its own kind of hunger. The more ground he secured, the more he wanted. The more he lost sleep, the less he cared who bled so long as the ink dried in his favor. One night, headlights swept across the yard. Neighbors stood outside the gate, angry voices rising above the hum of crickets. They accused him of selling heritage, of digging up the bones of the past for checks that would be gone before the next drought. They said the ridge was sacred, that children played there, that stories older than oil were tied to those stones. The son answered with calm words, with contracts and logic, but nothing quenches the fire of memory. A rock struck the mailbox, a window cracked. The father came out then, walking into the dark with a lantern in his hand. He did not speak. He only stood between his son and the men, the light spilling across faces hard with anger. The neighbors left, but not with peace. The next morning, the father told the son he had signed no papers, sold no acres, yet somehow his name was being used in deals across the county. The son explained it: away legal structures, corporate shells, necessary moves to outpace the rivals. The father's face tightened. and in his silence was something worse than anger. Disappointment. He said one line before walking away. "When your name no longer belongs to you, neither does your soul." Rumors swirled. A fire broke out at a rig near the ridge, flames blackening the sky until ash fell like snow across the valley. Workers were pulled out, some burned, one missing. Number 1 claimed blame. The rival firm said safety was ignored. The Sun's allies said sabotage. The truth was buried under smoke. For the first time, the Sun felt fear not of loss, not of rivals, but of the land itself. As he stood at the edge of the fire line, he thought the ridge looked less like a place to build a future and more like a grave that had opened its mouth. And still, he could not stop. The machine was moving, and he was tied to it. The woman from the diner told him there was one last push, one final piece that would lock the county in his favor. She smiled when she said it, but her smile was thin. The Sun felt the weight of her words. He knew that every step forward now was not just business, it was war. And war leaves nothing untouched, not even the victors. Asterisk, the war came not with bullets, but with signatures. The rival firm filed claims in every corner of the county, stacking paper like ammunition, each one designed to bury the Sun under weight he could not carry. Courthouse clerks worked by lantern light, their desks drowning in deeds and counterdeeds. On the streets, men whispered that the ridge was cursed, that no good could come from cutting its heart open. Cattle refused to graze there. Children swore they heard the ground hum at night. Whether truth or rumor, the land itself seemed to take sides, and not his. The father's silence broke only once, and it cut deeper than any insult. "Son, you're fighting men who don't bleed here. They can walk away when the oil dries. But when the smoke clears, you'll still be standing on this dirt, and it will remember everything you've done." The Sun wanted to answer, to tell him this was survival, that he was protecting them, but his throat closed around the words. In that moment, he realized he no longer knew if he was fighting for his family or only for himself. The woman from the diner pushed harder. She said there was a chance to end it all in one move, a merger. The rival firm would fold into their own, the lawyers silenced by money, the county chained to a single name, his name. All it would take was surrendering a piece of the ridge. Not all of it, just enough to appease the ghosts in suits. The Sun looked at the map. The line cut straight through the oldest part of the pasture, where his grandfather had been laid in the ground without stone or marker, just a wooden cross that had long since turned to dust. That night he dreamed of the ridge as if it were alive. He saw roots twisting like veins, bones hidden deep, oil rising like blood through cracks. He woke drenched in sweat, the pump jack outside groaning like a heartbeat in the dark. He stared at the ceiling until dawn, and when the first light touched the windowsill, he knew what he would do. He called the meeting. In a cold office far from the dust, under fluorescent lights that buzzed like insects, papers slid across the table. He signed them with steady hands, each stroke a nail in the coffin of something he could not name. The merger was done. The war was over. He had won, or so they told him. When he returned home, the land was quiet. No neighbors at the gate, no shouts, no rocks through the windows, just silence. The father was gone from the porch. The kitchen was empty except for the deed, left in the center of the table like a relic. On it was a note in his father's hand, short and final. "This land no longer speaks with our voice. It speaks with theirs. I will not stand in its shadow." The Sun walked out to the ridge at dusk, papers in his pocket, victory on his shoulders, and yet he felt hollow. The wind cut across the stones, carrying the faint smell of ash from the burned rig. He stood there, waiting for the sense of triumph to come, waiting for the promise of power to fill the silence. But the ridge gave him nothing. No answers, no absolution, only the sound of coyotes, calling out like mourners in the dark. He had become what he wanted, a man with power, a name that carried weight. But standing on that scarred ground, he understood too late that power was only another kind of hunger, one that could never be fed. And as the stars rose over Texas, sharp and cold, the land remembered him not as a savior, not as a builder, but as another man who carved his own story into its skin and left it bleeding,